Welcome to Your Vote, yourTV's extensive coverage of the 2025 provincial election. I'm your host, Mark Rockburn, and over the next half hour, we'll introduce you to the Green Party candidate for the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South, Maxwell Groves. Maxwell was raised in Port Hope, went to Toronto to do for the work purposes, is now back living north of Cobourg. So Maxwell, welcome, and thanks for coming into the yourTV studio to get to know you a little bit more.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
So let's talk about who Maxwell Groves is, and we like to start these interviews with that question, and everybody says, "Oh, really?" And but it's a way to introduce you to the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South.
My name is Maxwell Groves. I was born and raised in Port Hope. My mother was a support worker. My father was an auto worker. I have deep roots in the community. I'm very trustworthy, in my opinion, and that's what other people tell me as well. And that's why I've decided to get involved in politics, because we need some fresh faces that speak to the Northumberland, and I don't think we have nearly as good a representation as we could have.
So have you ever ran politically before?
No, this is my first time.
Why now then?
I looked at the political landscape. There's blatant corruption going on. Doug Ford has taken us for a ride, and the Liberals have let them. I used to live in Kathleen Wynne's riding. I told Kathleen Wynne, Stephen Del Duca is an unwinnable candidate. He chose to build a pool in his backyard rather than to respect the watershed that his backyard is a part of. He went and did it anyways because he knew he had the political capital to get away with it. These aren't leaders I want for Ontario. Therefore, I decided to get involved. I did some research. I found Mike Schreiner. I found his policy, and I like everything I've read.
So expand on that for me. Why the Green Party? And as I did a little research on you, and this is really an open half hour, and I tell all the candidates the same thing. This is really your time to explain to the residents of Northumberland-Peterborough South why they should vote for you. So really, it's your time, and we talk about a few things that you would like to talk about, and I've got a few things. But you're an active outdoorsman, you're a conservationist, you love camping, you're a canoeing enthusiast, as your press release said. So why the Green Party? Is it because of all those things that you fell in love or fell in line with the Green Party?
It certainly helps, but to me, what it means to be green has sort of changed over the years. There's this perception that we want people to weave baskets in the dark, and that's not what being green's about. Being green is a license to be myself. Being green means I don't have to lie to people or compromise my integrity. Being green is just a pact that there's something more valuable than our own personal profits and that it's worth protecting. That's really it.
You talk about the way, and we talked about it before we came on camera, about how this party has evolved. I said that I've been in this job for 27 years and have covered many provincial and federal elections, but one of the main things about the Green Party is how it has evolved over the last 20-some years that I've seen it. As you stated, there was a time early on where some people looked at the policies or thoughts and went, "That's nice, but not really what is going to help the people or the province or federally along." But the party has certainly evolved from those days to what it is now.
Absolutely, and being a young person who works in technology, I'm seeing all of these advances that are happening, and Ontario is going to fundamentally change, not only in the next 5 years, but beyond that, 10, 20 years from now. We need creative leaders that can imagine what that's going to look like. And there are so many new technologies that can make the society that we live in more green. For example, windmills. There's a lot of controversy around Wesleyville, whether or not we need more nuclear power. I didn't like windmills at first. They're kind of ugly, but the more I learned about the technology, the more I learned that the next generation can provide baseload power. There's things that we can do to offset the perceived disadvantages of renewable energy. So the landscape is changing, not just in politics, but in our economy and our society. And Greens are perfectly situated to take advantage of that change.
So as we get into this election, it's a very, very short time frame of from the time it was announced to the time when election will happen on February 27th. it kind of puts the, in any of the ridings across the province of Ontario, the elected MPP, it certainly puts them in the driver's seat as they have the face recognition when, with a short, very time frame of an election, it's hard for others than the incumbent to get their names out. So how does Maxwell Grove going about getting the name out as to who you are and why people should vote for you?
Well, we're getting the name out any way we can. Unfortunately, Doug planned this election to use the winter against us. Today, we just had a blizzard overnight. It's hard to go canvassing. It's hard to even get your signs to stick in the ground. So this was all done very intentionally. However, as I said before, there is a need for new voices in politics. 60% of Ontario, and Northumberland included, didn't vote at all in the last election. Why is that? We want to be the voice to hear all the people who don't feel like their voice is being met. We are the new choice that, yeah.
So you stated 60%, and it's a well-known fact that over 60% of the voters in the province of Ontario didn't vote, and we're heading into a $189 million election. So how do we change that to get those people out to vote and get them engaged in this?
We need to listen to them. We need to understand what their needs are. When housing started becoming expensive, it wasn't because of COVID. It happened 5-6 years before COVID. And when I would tell people, as a young person getting my foot in the door, all of my money is going towards rent, I don't think it needs to be this way. The answer we got was, well, you should stop eating so much avocado toast. We were completely dismissed, and that is the millennial experience in politics. We work, we pay taxes, we went to school, we took on debt, we're paying interest on that debt, and yet our politicians are ignoring us. It's not right.
So how would you change that if elected as the next member of Parliament for Northumberland-Peterborough South?
As someone who grew up here and has been here, generally I would come home on weekends, so I never really left Northumberland. I look at all the holistic issues that are affecting us. One of the first things is transit. Doug's talking about building a $60 billion tunnel under the 401. And if you listen to city planners, more lanes don't work. It induces demand. And especially now, since we've had people called back to the office, we have all these new subdivisions in Brooklyn, for example, it takes 2.5 hours to get to Toronto from here. That's double what it used to take when I first got my driver's license. So there's all sorts of things we can do, but Doug's been ignoring us, he's been ignoring our needs, and the people of Northumberland are being taken for a ride.
What are you hearing as you're out and about canvassing, getting out the doors? Because obviously the only way to get your face out is interviews such as this with other media, doing all candidates debate, but really the one-on-one is when you go to the door. So what are you hearing when you go to doors, and how's the reception been?
I'm hearing that we need a lot more mental health supports, both from people who directly need it themselves, and they're concerned about things like homelessness, about drug use on our streets, and that ties into mental health as well. One of the things that has really stuck in my mind is, well, we have people who go to the supportive housing division, they canvass the encampments, and there's people who don't want help. And that's always going to be a factor. There are people who aren't ready to get help, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in the supports that they need when they are ready for help. There's also a big distinction that I want to make, that there is a difference between a shelter bed and a treatment bed at an addiction center. If you give someone a bed, but you don't address any of the mental health problems, they will use again because it's an addiction issue. It's as plain as that. It's not a personal failing. If somebody wants treatment for an addiction issue, generally they have to go to CAMH. How do you get to CAMH from Northumberland if there's no transit? You can't. So we're setting people up to fail. And again, it all comes down to mental health issues.
As you're out and about and talking to individuals, What do you say to those, or what's the Green Party thought of how you correct this homelessness in encampments in the province? And we should state, it's not just a provincial issue, it is a national issue, and we certainly saw a major one here in the town of Coburg, the encampment at the old Brookside. But so what is the philosophy of the Greens, or what's their thoughts on how to rectify these situations and get the individuals that you say need the help, actually get them the help?
Well, it's a two-pronged issue. There is the mental health portion that I spoke to, but also there hasn't been enough housing in Ontario for years. We started falling behind on housing in the 90s. So we can't look at a problem and be like, well, you just didn't work hard enough. You should be able to afford a $2,000 rent. Housing first is how we need to address it. There's a lot of people who, because they're on OW or ODSP or for whatever reason, haven't been able to keep up with the cost of living. So we need to stop treating it as a personal failure and look at the systemic reasons why people are in this situation.
It's certainly the way to go, as we've seen many times and through many stories of in the riding and across the province and across the country, that the people that go to try to get help have stated that there is no help once you get off the street. You go to, as you say, to these shelters, and there's really no help any longer after that. Or when they do want to get help, it's either super expensive because of the fact that there's many private facilities to help you, for help the individual's addiction, to give them treatment. Or on the flip side of that, it's many years before you could actually get into one ran by the province. So how do we correct that?
We need to invest in the actual facilities. We need to make sure that we're funding hospitals, inpatient treatment, clinics, make sure the actual facilities are there. And we also need to invest in a workforce. Paying personal support workers less than $20 an hour when they have to deal with some of the most atrocious injustices in our society will burn anybody out. We need to make sure that we have a workforce that has their own needs being met.
So let's talk about Mike Schreiner and the Green Party and your plans for the economy, of how to turn the economy around and get more people into the workforce.
Well, it's an exciting time to be green. One of the pledges that we have in the 2025 platform is to invest over $1 trillion a year, which is a lot of money, into the economy as part of a green transition. So what will that look like? That's getting heat pumps into people's homes. There are so many steps right now to invest in green technology, and the onus always goes back to the homeowner. Or if you're a renter, you don't really have a choice on whether or not you want to take advantage of these. So getting heat pumps available, training and supporting a workforce that can install them. And again, it goes down to all sorts of improvements that we can do. Like, I live in an older home. It's brick. It holds heat really well in the winter, but our windows are old. The cost it would take to replace all of the windows in our home would be astronomical. I don't have the money for that. My family doesn't have the money for that. So if we had grants, things available, it would help us retrofit our home, and it would supply jobs to all the people doing this sort of work. There's hooking EVs up into your garage, those need electricians. There are so many jobs in this green transition that can be created. It'll supercharge the economy.
Maxwell, we're up on break. Still lots more to talk about, and we'll certainly talk about agriculture, as it's no secret, I should say, that the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South has a very large agricultural part. We'll talk about what the plans are for youth as well, and internet as well. It seems to be an issue in this riding with the hills and valleys, depending on where you are. So still lots more to talk about here on Your Vote, Your TV's extensive coverage of the 2025 provincial election. Welcome back to Your Vote, Your TV's extensive coverage of the 2025 provincial election. I'm Mark Rockburn, and joining me in the Your TV studios is the Green Party candidate for the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South, Maxwell Groves. And Maxwell, what I picked up a number of times in some of your answers is transportation, and lack thereof transportation, and a transportation plan. What is your plan for transportation for the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South?
My plan for transportation Northumberland-Peterborough South is to try to get the go here. Every time transit comes up, people talk about, well, there was this pilot program that was around getting people around Quincy and not enough people were riding it. It cost municipalities a lot of money. It wasn't a success. Why should people care about transit? And transit initiatives like that were destined to fail because it is not a municipality's prerogative to provide regional transit. It is the provincial government's prerogative to do so. GO stands for the Government of Ontario. It is not the Government of Toronto. They have a duty to provide us the transit that we need. Every time somebody hops on the 401 to drive to Oshawa, that is a failure in policy. We have 2 rail corridors that go through most of our riding. Via is the only way you can get in and out of Northumberland if you don't have a car. Why is the federal government providing commuter service in Ontario? It doesn't make any sense.
So how do you go about getting that plan, and how do you, if elected, and go about making these changes that are needed? Because it is transportation in this riding is the number one. You talk to any mayor, you talk about anybody that sits on county council, you talk to the CAO of Northumberland County. Transportation is the biggest issue with, just in this riding, and then trying to get services outside of this riding in Toronto. As you stated, it's a joke at times. You look at a train service that has now, since the pandemic, become very, very expensive to be able to take the train. Obviously, as you stated, the way to go is GO, but you need to get to Oshawa to be able to get on the GO. So you're now putting people on the road to get to Oshawa to get on the GO to go into Toronto. So how do we go about getting that to where we need to be?
Well, we have a government right now that's kind of kicking the can down the road, and a lot of that is driven by this desire to have perfect services. So when we look at these initiatives like building more housing or building high-speed rail or electrified rail, those are all great things to think about for the future, but it doesn't really help us now. We need interim solutions. They don't have to be perfect, they just have to be better than the status quo. I want to get rail service out here. It would be expensive, but public transit is supposed to be, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting my words.
Yeah, you need public transportation to be able to get into the riding, and yes, it is an expensive to get into.
Subsidized.
Right.
Thank you. It needs to be subsidized. It is a public good, so this argument that, well, getting rail service out here is a waste of money, it's not. Especially when we look at Ontario holistically, we need to build a lot more housing, and Northumberland has the room. Not just the farmland that people want to pave over, but we are in a rail corridor. That is the perfect place to build denser, missing middle housing and walkable communities. The same sort of walkable communities that have made Cobourg, Port Hope, Brighton beautiful. We can't build those communities anymore because they were all designed as railroad towns.
Right. Absolutely. You see that anywhere as you travel that corridor. You see the pockets of housing that formed around the rail yard in many communities, especially in the one I grew up in Smith Falls. It was a rail town, and you see the pockets of communities that are around it. But I'm glad you brought up agriculture because of the fact that this is a very rural riding. Lots of agricultural land out there. Lots of agriculture or farms that are still in operation despite that, and I like the fact that you brought up that we have to quit paving over our agricultural lands just to build houses, because sooner or later that land runs out. It's not renewable, where all of a sudden you could just get some new land and start doing agriculture again. So let's talk about, when I was reading your bio, you said that you're in favor of sustainable farming practices. So I want you to expand on that for me.
Absolutely. So I've worked on a farm. I worked with the Bowgens. I milked cows in high school. I have first experience on a farm. A lot of times we talk about the cost of food, how to get the price of food down. Those are all great points, but a lot of times farmers are running on these tight budgets because our biggest trading partner in Ontario is the United States. So there's always this pressure to keep up with the American food system, whether it's subsidies for corn from the American government, they grow way too much corn, or if it's factory farming and cutting corners in the quality of life of livestock. Buying Canadian, taking these pressures off our farmers and our agricultural workers will empower them to keep doing what they're doing, which is feeding cities.
As we look at it being an agriculture riding a big chunk of it, we also have many very different communities, such as Cobourg or Port Hope, and then, as we look to the east, we have communities of Brighton that are completely different, or Colborne, or Trent Hills. How do you bring this community together, and how do you juggle all the different aspects of what this riding brings to?
It's tough because Northumberland, as you said, it's a very diverse riding. I know Peterborough South often feels like they're forgotten about because they're not in the Peterborough catchment, they're in our catchment, yet everyone talks about Northumberland. So again, it goes down to just hearing their voices, letting people who are subject matter experts speak, giving them a platform, and then taking what they tell us and bringing it to Queen's Park so that we can be the action that they need.
I asked this question of all the candidates thus far, and I even asked it to the incumbent, David Piccini. Why are we having this election?
We're having this election because the next 5 years are going to be a little bit spicy. There's a lot of overarching things that are happening. For example, most of the baby boomers are going to retire in the next 5 years. There's going to be some growing pains. Doug knows this, and he wants to get ahead of the narrative. This has very little to do with tariffs.
I was going to ask you that. When he did call the election in late January, he said it was because of the possible tariffs being put in place by President Donald Trump, and he didn't have the mandate at that time to spend or do what he needed to do to counter these tariffs. I take it you're not a believer of that.
No. Doug Ford is afraid of Donald Trump because he's been stealing his homework for the last 8 years. Any sort of action on tariffs would be a united federal issue. Things that we can do provincially or even in our own homes, buy Canadian, support Canadian farmers, support Canadian businesses. We need a fair trade agreement for Canada. We need to stop thinking as the United States as our only consumer and our only provider of goods.
One thing that has come out with this tariff talk and such is the unity of coming together more as a country, interprovincial trading, and it's starting to shine the light that it's, as much as people would think it's an easy thing to do, it really isn't an easy thing to do, to trade within your own country, back and forth. How do we change that up, or how would the Green Party change that up?
We need to invest in infrastructure to break down barriers in cross-provincial trade. I haven't seen all of Canada. I'm not sure how many people have actually driven from coast to coast, but I have seen good chunks of it. There's a lot of areas that have nothing going on. The Trans-Canada is in pieces. There are all sorts of things we can do in terms of policy. Even like there's bureaucracy in place where breweries from out east can't sell beer here. There's just so much red tape that we can tear down and actually get people working together instead of just thinking about the United States over and over again.
One of the other topics that maybe gets lost in it, and it's good to see that you're a young candidate in this election, is the youth, and sometimes they get overlooked. And I know in a couple of your answers earlier in the interview, certainly is you still find that at your age that you're being overlooked because maybe you're not that certain age yet that you could be classified as an adult where you're taken seriously. So how do we deal with the youth issues in this province?
The youth need to make themselves available to learn. And I don't want to say that to put an onus on young people. They're young, they're not the leaders of our society, and I don't just mean me. As you can see by my crow's feet, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I worry about the Gen Z and the generations behind me, because they're the ones who are going to get affected by things like AI, climate change the most. And as I said before, in the next 5 years, there's going to be huge changes in the workforce. We need to pair young people with the subject matter experts that are still available to give their knowledge to the next generation. So building that community, having mentorship, establishing leaders, it all comes into place.
About a minute and a half left here. What are you seeing as the #1 priority for the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South?
We need to get rid of red tape that stops us from building the missing middle housing that we need. Young people desperately crave walkable communities. We desperately crave transit. We don't want to sit on the 401 for 5 hours. We want to be able to get on the train, go see a Jays game, have a couple beers, not have to worry about driving home. We want to spend time with our family. When I tell people we need transit in Northumberland, it's not just to get to work. Northumberland is full of empty nesters, and we are living in a loneliness epidemic. Building homes means that children like me, I'm not a child, but I am someone's son, can come back to Northumberland and have room to start their own families. If you miss your children, if you want to see more of your grandchildren, we need housing and we need transit.
Maxwell, thank you very much for coming into the yourTV studio and allowing me to introduce you to the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South. And the best thing anybody could do out there is don't be one of the 60% that do not vote on Election Day, which is February 27th. You've been watching Your Vote, yourTV's extensive coverage of the 2025 provincial election. I'm Mark Rockburn. He's Maxwell Groves, the Green candidate for the riding of Northumberland-Peterborough South.